Good evening. This marks a return to the longer form videos that I had started doing and really concentrated on for a year. For the last month or so, I've been concentrating more on the shorts, which have proven to be surprisingly popular. But last week, when I was in Columbus for the Origins Game Fair, I presented on 4 subjects for the Origins War College and Armchair Dragoons, one of which was a big surprise to me how popular it was and how many people showed up, was one on Marcus Licinius Crassus and the invasion of Parthia. I know I asked people what they knew of the late Roman Republic and the first triumvirate and Crassus, and nobody seemed to know much of anything, and I don't think very many people had even seen Spartacus, uh, in which Crassus is a character. But the nice thing was that people did not know very much about the topic, but were interested and wanted to find out, and I was happy to help. I've been interested in the late Roman Republic really for longer than I can remember. And I remember taking a Hellenistic history class at Duquesne University from Dr. Jerry Clack, now deceased, who was absolutely outstanding. And he covered not just the Hellenistic kingdoms, but the rise of the Roman Republic until the dictatorship of Julius Caesar. So there's overlap here. It's part of the same area that the late Dr. Clack used to teach about. And I've remained fascinated before and since. So I'd like to get on with the story of Marcus Licinius Crassus and his invasion of Parthia. Let's look at some of the background here. Rome was coming off a long period of civil strife and instability as the institutions of the Republic weakened and eventually collapsed into civil war. The Civil War was one of many, and really the first that was to afflict Rome. We would have them throughout the empire, but in the late Republic, the Civil War was brutal. It was really for the soul of Rome and extremely lethal. And it really culminated in the years 82 to 83 to 82 BCE. And yeah, I do use that system with dating because I had other professors who were archaeologists, especially the late Dr. Marilyn Schaub, whose claim to fame was that she and her husband, who taught at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, excavated what they thought was Sodom and Gomorrah. So yeah, field trips and summer vacation at Sodom and Gomorrah, pretty cool. But she was an adherent of the BCE and CE system, so this is what you're going to see through here. The civil war between Marius and Sulla was especially bitter because these were two guys that knew each other. Sulla had been a subordinate to Marius in Africa during the Numidian War. And this conflict was won by Lucius Cornelius Sulla. This wasn't just at the expense of Gaius Marius, but also his allies and relatives, including the family of one guy we remember, Gaius Julius Caesar. So Sulla won, and he was bitter, he was ruthless, and kind of echoing Clearchus, the Spartan general under whom Xenophon served in a Persian dynastic struggle. Xenophon remembered Clearchus as determined to reward his friends and punish his enemies. Well, Sulla, we see on the right here, said, "No friend ever served me, and no enemy ever wronged me, whom I have not repaid in full." Lucius Cornelius Sulla. So Sulla was kind of echoing that ruthless approach of Clearchus, only he ended better. He won. He served as dictator for an extended period, liquidated his enemies, and then, much to the surprise of everyone, retired. Then, from 73 to 71 BCE, we have the Third Servile War with Spartacus and the rebellious slaves and gladiators, in which Crassus was really the victor. This is the one thing that they've made movies about, especially the immortal one directed by Stanley Kubrick, starring Kirk Douglas. But this is something that shook Rome to its core. Now, Crassus did the heavy lifting, but Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, he gained all the credit in the triumph. He swept in, claimed the credit, and basically screwed Crassus out of the triumph, the ceremony, and all the credit for putting down what was really the greatest threat to Rome since Hannibal and his Carthaginian army had invaded over the Alps. So, yeah, Crassus was kind of better. So, who was Marcus Licinius Crassus? He was the richest man in Rome and the most popular as long as he was home in the city. Now, a lot of people, especially Plutarch, remember him for his greed. But Crassus was also rather free with his money. He'd lend it to anybody. But in return, borrowers became his clients and thus were bound to support him politically. He was also Rome's biggest slumlord. He had a real estate empire that he built, again, with a certain amount of Machiavellian ruthlessness. One way was that he founded a fire company. Now, he will put out fires, but only after he bought the burning property at fire sale prices. So, yeah, ethical? Probably not. But this was one of his approaches to business, what the English might call sharp practice. He also employed large numbers of slaves, skilled slaves, not just grunt labor, who repaired and maintained his properties. So this is a guy, he's the richest man in Rome. He's free with his money. He's got good people skills. And as long as he's in the city, he's the most popular guy. Because if you need money, go to Crassus. You might end up having to vote as he tells you. You become a client, because this is how things worked in Rome. But you need money, he's there. His partner, as it were, and colleague in the first triumvirate, was Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, also known to us as Pompey the Great, not to be confused with the soccer team in Portsmouth, England, also known as Pompey. But Pompey the Great was the most popular man in Rome, more popular than Crassus when he was away, because he would be out winning military victories. And in the case of the Third Servile War, maybe ones that other people won and he was there to pick up the glory. He's a veteran and successful military commander who started off really in the Civil War, supporting Sulla and raising cavalry units. And from a young age, he was very successful. He's also fat by this point. Corpulent is a term that I've seen over the years. And here's a bust of him that doesn't try to cover it up, but he's a wide body by now, but he's still a very good commander. Even if he is on the fat side, he may need an extra slave or two to carry his sedan chair around. But yeah, he's a fat body. Now, he's not as good at people skills as Crassus, which is why he's less popular when he's home, than when he's out on the road beating up on Rome's enemies. He's not as rich as Crassus, but then again, who was? Crassus could buy and sell basically everyone else in Rome. Pompey, his thing wasn't wealth, it wasn't business, it was war, and he's very good at it. Let's look at the balance of power here with the third guy in the triumvirate. You can't have a triumvirate with only two, and this guy is Julius Caesar. He's an up-and-comer at this point. He hasn't reached the peak of his power. He hasn't reached any of his lofty goals. And as such, he is the junior partner between the great military commander, Pompey, and the obscenely rich Marcus Licinius Crassus. He's the third guy in here. And he is definitely ambitious. I put this as his most important characteristic. In Rome, there was a definite stigma against wanting to be a king. He denied wanting to be a king, which would have been the politically safe thing to do, but he wanted the powers of being a king. He wanted to be dictator for life, which is basically what he got before he got knives in the back. Keep on thinking of the Bruce Springsteen song Badlands with poor man want to be rich, rich man want to be king, king ain't satisfied till he rules everything. That's Julius Caesar. Now, to pursue these goals, he's deep in debt. He lives well, but he's also paying his army in Gaul. And he's making war pay for war, and the war pays for politics. But he's always borrowing money. And this is something that goes on forever for him. This is Julius Caesar. He's not a great looking guy according to this. He's got more hair than me, but he's I think one of the most fascinating people in history, along with Napoleon and Alexander the Great. Not always the most admirable, shall we say. I know that Dr. Quack really couldn't stand him. A lot of people can't. But for all the things he did, he's definitely one of the most interesting characters of history. One for whom Shakespeare could write plays, one for whom we do movies. And he remains popular to this day and of deep interest, not just to historians, but even to the general public. You ask anyone off the street if they ever heard of a Roman, Caesar's name is the one that's most likely going to come up. That he becomes the face of Rome for a great many people. On the downside, he has a reputation of being kind of a bitch. Romans at this time were bisexual. In many cases, it wasn't something that was institutionalized as it was in Greece, especially in Sparta and Athens. It wasn't a rite of passage, but rich men with male slaves were allowed to have sex with them. But the disgrace was for a powerful Roman or someone of good family to take the submissive role and basically to be the bitch. And there was a lot of propaganda about Caesar that he had an affair in which he kind of played the girl to the king of Bithynia. And this was kind of black propaganda that Romans would come up against each other, such as Mark Antony throwing up with a hangover in the Senate chamber. That was a good one. And all the terrible things they said about Cleopatra, who was a much more formidable and intelligent woman, and not the whore that she was made out to be by Romans at the time. She ended up being the biggest threat to Rome, in their eyes at least, since Hannibal, and she did it by being a woman rather than being a general. So they were slandering her all the time. Caesar got some of the slander too for allegedly being a submissive homosexual at times. But at the same time, too, he was also a ladies' man. He kept long-term mistresses. I've always suspected he was the father of Brutus, the young Roman who stabbed him in the Senate chamber, and to whom Caesar reportedly said, "You too, Brutus, et tu, Brute." So this was a guy who may have been bisexual, but I think the propaganda about him being a bitch is really overrated and really overstated by Romans at the time, his political enemies especially. At the time, he's governor, at the time all this happens, he's governor of Cisalpine and Transalpine Gaul. So he's in charge of everything north of the Rubicon beyond the province of Italia. And he stretches his mandate there. Instead of just defending these two provinces, he drives north into what is today France and Belgium, maybe part of the Netherlands, to conquer and protect tribes there against each other and against Germans, against the Helvetii. And this is a quest that takes him as far as Britain, that he invades southern Britain. It's too tough. He turns around, says, "I won," declare victory, go home. But he is very active here, campaigning in Western Europe, far beyond really what he was supposed to do. But Caesar's one of these guys, if the Senate gives him an inch, he's going to take a mile and then just keep on going till he reaches the English Channel, and he's going to cross that thing. So he is at the time trying to amass the wealth in the model of Crassus, and he's also trying to get military honor and credit the way that Pompey did. Now, he's very friendly to Crassus. If I was going to say that I think he's friendly to both, but he is friendly and encouraging to Crassus. Well, he is also allied to Pompey. His daughter Julia is married to Pompey. So he's actually the father-in-law to Pompey the Great. And it's a very productive and important dynastic marriage here that helps maintain the peace between these three really ambitious and upwardly mobile, although Crassus is about as rich as you can get. But three guys who want the power. They like the character in the Springsteen song. But there's a certain stability here. And I see Caesar as sort of the balancer between the two. He's personally friendly to Crassus. I don't know how much money Crassus may have been lending him, but he's friendly to Crassus, encouraging. And he's also related by marriage to Pompey, with whom he is also friendly. And one of the things that Caesar does is that when Crassus comes up with this idea of invading the Parthian Empire, Caesar encourages him, not just in words, but as we shall see, in deed, in action. Caesar acts as an ally to Crassus and assists him in this. As we'll see, it's maybe not the best idea in the world, especially as executed by Crassus, but Caesar does not present any opposition, and he's very encouraging. And a lot of Rome isn't. A lot of Rome hates this idea. They think it's a disgrace. Caesar, not at all. So here's Crassus's plan. First of all, we have to ask, why? This may not have been the best idea in the world. It's not going to end well. But why would Crassus want to do this? There is an appeal. First of all, it's there. The Parthians were a people who had succeeded to rule what had been the core of the old Persian Empire. They overthrew the Persians, and there were related people who established their own rule over this area, which had also been part of Hellenistic kingdoms left in the wake of Alexander the Great and his march to India. So you have this appeal. Here's an empire, and it's a near peer of the Roman Republic. The Romans don't have any equals. They don't have other empires at this point on their borders. They know about China. They have some trade through the Indian Ocean. As the Irish economist, historian Raoul McLaughlin has written about, they have trade through the Indian Ocean. They know about India. They trade with them. They know that China is there, but they don't have close contact. They have close contact with Parthia. This is a near peer of Rome, and it's right on their doorstep. Parthia is also very wealthy. Why? It's an empire. They have tribute from their subject peoples. They have natural resources, gold, silver, and they have the means of spending money for power. And by defeating Parthia, one could achieve the fame of Alexander the Great, who annihilated Persia. Not just annihilated it, he took it over and tried to fuse Persian culture with Hellenistic culture. That he also took Egypt and Syria, and then overturned the Persian Empire, and it was divided into a series of Hellenistic kingdoms under his generals. That if you could march to India, if you could conquer in the east the way that Alexander did, you could replicate his fame. And this is very important to anyone in the ancient world, to achieve fame. And it's something, too, that lasts for centuries. Napoleon, for example, when he invaded Egypt as a young man, the idea there was to take Egypt and then use that as a springboard to march east in the footsteps of Alexander and eventually attack British India. So the ghost of Alexander remains vocal and powerful for centuries, and especially in the Roman world. And if you could achieve the fame of Alexander, your name would be sung for centuries. And Crassus sees this. Now, there's a slight problem. Parthia and Rome were at peace. They had very friendly relations at this time. There was no beef between Rome and Parthia. That Parthia did nothing to Rome. Rome had actually intervened on the side of Parthian rulers, had maintained good relations with the winners of their struggles, and they were a near peer that Rome did not see a great need of going out and conquering. And they weren't barbarians like, say, the Gauls were. The Gauls were scary to the Romans. Remember, the Gauls at one point earlier in the Republic had driven into Italy and had conquered Rome itself, except for the Capitoline Hill, which was saved by honking geese, supposedly, had exacted tribute from Rome. They were a direct threat. The Gauls had that scary reputation, the way that Hannibal and eventually Cleopatra would have. And they're barbarians in the Romans' eyes, because they're not a Hellenistic Mediterranean people. That they do not subscribe to the Greco-Roman perspective. Parthia, on the other hand, there's a healthy, from Roman view, Hellenistic influence in Parthia. That they were not just Alexander's speed bump, they were also Alexander's cultural heirs. And they are connected into the Mediterranean, Hellenistic, Greco-Roman civilizations. So they're culturally peers as well as peers in terms of power. And they're at peace. This is going to be a problem for anybody not named Marcus Licinius Crassus. Now, they've had a dynastic struggle. They had a king named Phraates. He was deposed by his sons, Mithridates and Orodes, in 57 BCE. Mithridates then deposed his brother, and Orodes regained the throne with the help of the Romans. And Mithridates at this point was out of power. He was in Mesopotamia. He did have a power base, but he was off the throne, not quite out of the picture. But you have to remember, Orodes in part owed his throne to Roman assistance. So there's no beef between him and the Romans. So Crassus has to build an army, and he does. He starts by organizing 7 legions in Rome at his own expense. This is an investment for him. He can pay for 7 legions, which is inconceivable to us today. Imagine George W. Bush, H.W. Bush, paying for all the troops to invade Iraq in 2003. Can't do it. Crassus could, and he could do it quite readily. He's the richest man in Rome, maybe the richest man in the world at his time. So he built 7 legions at his own expense. Problem is, the best potential recruits are already gone. They've been enlisted in the legions controlled by Pompey and Crassus, his fellow triumvirs, and there's not a lot of enthusiasm for this invasion of Parthia. Crassus even had to use press gangs to get soldiers. So he could pay them, but he couldn't get the good ones. So his legions are going to start off as second rate compared to the ones that are already fighting in Gaul, for example, under Caesar. He also faces a lot of open and angry opposition. Marcus Tullius Cicero is one of Crassus's great enemies, and he declares that Rome has no pretext for war. Any and all grievances are on the Parthian side. They have no beef with Parthia. Why invade them? It's completely selfish. And he's the reason why the Roman state does not get behind this. Cicero is definitely a force of nature in Rome at this time. And he's against this war. Now, when marching out of Rome on the 15th of November, 55 BCE, Crassus and his soldiers are met by a tribune who invokes one of the darkest curses possible in Rome. Plutarch never goes into what it is, but it's pretty bad. And Rome had some very dark religious aspects. This is one of the top worst ones. So they're marching out, and Romans put a lot of store into omens and augurs. This is not a good one. This is a really, really bad omen, that they start off with a curse. And also, too, Crassus is a man in a hurry. He is going to be governor of Syria, just as Caesar is governor in Gaul, Transalpine and Cisalpine Gaul. And he wants to get started with this war in Parthia. So he's in a hurry to get to Syria. And his troops sail from Brundisium in the foot of the Italian boot in the middle of winter, and they end up losing ships to storms, which is entirely predictable. You don't need some dark demonic curse to bring this about. You just have to understand weather in the Mediterranean. Now, he has one ally there. Near Syria is the kingdom of Armenia under King Artavasdes. Armenia is a power, it's not a big one like Rome or Parthia, but they've got untapped manpower and an easier invasion route than the one that Crassus intends to use. It's more fertile. You've got a larger population to support the army. It would be easier, and it's not going to be used. So this is another bad idea for Marcus Licinius Crassus. So, Crassus's plan, he still has to build up his army even when he gets to Syria. And he's got to rely on allies and other foreigners for supporting arms. This is typical. The Romans, from the very beginning, had never relied completely on their own manpower. You might have had the legions, but they would go elsewhere to get people like archers, slingers, light and heavy cavalry. There were others that had better capabilities and more talent than they did. And the Romans would use these people as allies, maybe mercenaries, to support the heavy infantry of the legions. Crassus is not going to be any different. So he gets Arab cavalry contributed by King Ariamnes of Osroene and by another Arab across the Euphrates River, Alcadonius. And so he's got Arab white cavalry with his army. That's not the end of it. He also gets 1,000 German horsemen under his son, Publius Licinius Crassus. Now, they were dispatched from Gaul by Caesar. Remember, Caesar is encouraging Crassus. Here it is by deed as well as by word. And Publius is an extremely important officer in Gaul. He is probably the third-rated officer in that campaign against the Gauls beyond Transalpine Gaul after Caesar and Titus Labienus. He's very effective as an independent commander. And when Caesar sends him, he's not just sending Crassus' son, he's sending an effective, proven commander. There's also another Roman involved named Gaius Cassius Longinus. And he shows up very prominently in later Roman history. He's later on the Pompeian side, and he's one of the key assassins of Julius Caesar. And definitely takes the side that Caesar should not be dictator for life, and he has the sharp knife to show for it. But Gaius Cassius Longinus is going to prove to be a very important commander in this campaign, and someone who really saves something out of it after all of Crassus's mistakes. At least this is what the surviving sources tell us. So let's look at the actual invasion, and it's beginning in 54 BCE. Now, Cassius advises that Crassus invade through northern Mesopotamia. Instead of taking a more northerly route through Armenia, which is going to be easier, it's more watered, there are more resources, and it's full of Armenian allies. Crassus is still in a hurry. He's going to take the direct route through the south, which is through modern Kurdistan, southern Anatolia, Iraq, which is semi-arid. Now, it's not well defended. The local Parthian governor, Seleucus, he has a few troops at his disposal, and quite sensibly, he retreats before the legions. And most towns along the way just accept Roman garrisons. They see an overwhelming force and they give in. One doesn't, Zenododium. They resist and they kill about 100 Romans. Crassus takes the city. He enslaves the population, which means he makes money from it because you can sell off your slaves. And he and his army make some money from this resistance. Now, this is kind of an act of hubris, to use the Greek term. Despite the small size of this city and the victory, Crassus allows himself to be honored by his troops as imperator. This is the word from which emperor comes, and this is not a name for a ruler. This is a name for a successful commander. So he's kind of grabbing this title out of a very, very small victory, and he's allowing it to happen. Maybe his troops want to call him imperator, but he doesn't show the sense of common sense that other Romans might in refusing the title. He allows it to happen. He takes the honor. to which he is really not entitled. So it's a little bit of a case of classical stolen valor, if you will. So what does Crassus do after this allegedly great victory? He retreats back to Syria and goes into winter quarters, which may be a sensible decision. He's not going to get caught out in the semi-arid steppe. He's going to go back to the settled and very wealthy province and make winter quarters and come back again the next spring. He leaves two cohorts from each legion, about 7,000 troops, plus about 1,000 cavalry. They're left behind as garrisons for the cities that gave in to the Romans, that surrendered readily, as well as the one that didn't. So this is typical of the Romans, that they would break off battle groups from legions for garrisons, for support, and a legion that usually had 10 cohorts would then operate with maybe 8. This is normal Roman doctrine and practice. So he leaves the legionnaires behind, along with 1,000 cavalry. Apparently not the Germans, but from Gaul. But he leaves about 1,000 cavalry behind to support those legionary garrisons. But here's where he makes another brain donor mistake. Instead of drilling and training his troops, remember, they're not the best, they need training. Instead of doing this, he spends his downtime attending to his finances and looting temples. Yeah, how do you get bad karma? How do you get bad luck in the Roman world? He goes out and he loots temples, including the big one that the Jews have in Jerusalem. So he's getting a whole lot of gods angry at him at this point, from a Roman point of view. But he's doing what Crassus does, which is indulging his greed. At least this was what Roman and Greek authors at the time would have you believe. But yeah, maybe getting cash to pay his troops would be a good idea. But indiscriminately looting temples in areas that the Romans already control, not necessarily the best of actions. Now, he gets envoys from Armenia, and they promise substantial reinforcements on one condition: Crassus would march through their territory. They're giving him a reason to bring his army north. He also gets 6,000 cavalry from Artavasdes, from his own guard, and just a taste of what he might get from Armenia, and another 10,000 heavy cavalry and 30,000 infantry. They're promised if he takes that route through Armenia. So this is promising to be a massive army with a whole lot of help if he takes that northern route, which is also going to be logistically a lot easier, and it's going to be easier on his troops. And Artavasdes wants in on this, and he's willing to put up his army to help Crassus. Of course, Crassus being Crassus, he turns it down. Now the Parthians, they send envoys, and they offer mercy if Crassus would just get up and leave. They're still willing to make peace at this point, but they're really kind of insulting about it, because Crassus is 60 years old. He's younger than me, but he looks a heck of a lot older. And the Parthians say they'll consider his senility, as well as the fact this is a private war, not won by the Roman Republic, but they'll consider his deteriorating cognition as they extend this mercy to him. So you got to wonder just how serious they were in offering mercy to the senile old git, and hope that he'll go away and head back to Rome, which would be disgraceful. This isn't going to happen. And they're insulting about it, and they're talking trash. And it's not going to go anywhere. It should it, and it doesn't. So Crassus returns to invade Parthia. He resumes his invasion 53 BCE, again taking that southern route into Mesopotamia rather than Armenia. Now, Orodes divides his army in two, and he takes the larger part under his own command. They face the Armenians. This is kind of surprising. There's that old adage that you do not divide your army in the face of the enemy. And Orodes does just that. And he sends a smaller part against Crassus with his 7 legions. They may be second rate, but it's still a powerful force. And this consists of about 10,000 horse archers and heavy cavalry, led by Orodes' most capable general, Serenus. You see a statue that is supposed to be him on the right. And Serenus has different viewpoints, or people have different viewpoints towards him. This statue looks real manly and stuff, but he was also known to wear makeup. He loved luxury and traveled with his concubines as well as his army. But he can afford to do this because he's very, very good, and he's proven himself before in the civil wars and military struggles between his boss Orodes and Orodes' brother Mithridates. He also has a secret weapon. This is a camel train of Arabian camels. Now, usually horse archers fire their arrows right away. That's the end. He has this logistical secret weapon that they can keep on going back to the camels and pick up more arrows, so they never quite run out. This is not a tactic that has to end anytime soon. And this is going to prove to be absolutely important. I would call this the real decisive asset that the Parthians have against Crassus and his private Roman army. And this is all he really needs to win. He's got an inferior army of only 10,000 horse archers and heavy cavalry. But he has this logistical advantage that can help him defeat a Roman army several times the size of his own. Now, here's the approach to the Battle of Carrhae. As with so much else, we can't determine the precise day that anything happens, with the possible exception of the 15th of November when Crassus's army marched out and got cursed. But Crassus's army, with 7 legions of 8 cohorts each, 4,000 light infantry and 4,000 cavalry, soon augmented by more Arab horsemen, they march into Parthia. Crassus is in a hurry, and he keeps on ignoring Cassius. Cassius is the voice of reason, and Crassus will not listen to any of this. Cassius advises to wait in one of the garrison towns until he has more information on the Parthians who look like they're fleeing. Remember the whole old tactic of the feigned retreat. We see it through history. The Mongols, centuries later, did it very well. Run away in what looks like fear, then lure the enemy deeper, get them tired, and then turn around and attack. This may have been what the Parthians were doing. Crassus refuses. He doesn't listen again. Now, Cassius advises Marcus Licinius Crassus to move along the Euphrates River. This would guard his flank and allow supplies to be moved by boat. This would be a logistical boon. Crassus refuses again. He's not listening. And then, in what really pretends to be bad, both Arab allies leave and take all their troops with them. Now, this is something that should have shown to Crassus that rats were jumping off the about to be sinking ship. He doesn't pay attention. Another brainwave for Marcus Licinius Crassus. So the battle starts. The Romans reach the Bolissus River, also known as the Balic, and Cassius advises Crassus to stop and let the soldiers rest, which would make sense. In character, Crassus refuses. Instead, he lets them take a really short break, an inadequate meal, and then they move on. It's not the rest that they need. And by the way, you see the maps more like a schematic on the right. This is from the original article on the battle, which I wrote in Command Magazine many years ago. And the other battle map will also come from the same article. So it's more like a schematic because we don't know any details of the terrain. We know it was near the city of Carrhae, today known as Haran, and that's about it. So just that note on terrain. More ignoring Cassius. Cassius advises to keep an open order. This would spread the troops out more, extend the front, and make it harder to envelop the Romans. He does this for a little bit, then he closes ranks. So the Romans present a much more dense and easily flanked formation. Serenus, he opens the battle with his heavy cavalry. Now the Romans, to their credit, stand instead of breaking. Serenus pulls the shot cavalry back. And as they retreat, the horse archers go into action, surprising the Romans with their ability to reload. So the battle continues. Crassus sees the camel train, and he orders Publius and his Germans to attack towards it to keep those horse archers from resupplying. This would even the odds a lot more if they succeed. Now Publius charges, and his entire wing follows a feint retreat too far. He's caught on what was probably marshy ground, not good for cavalry, and this wing of the Roman army is nearly wiped out. Publius fights bravely, but he's killed, much to the happiness and jubilation of the Parthians. His head is brought forward on a spear, and this confirms the worst news to the Romans. It makes many of them despondent, though his father retains his composure for now. But this is one wing out of three of the Roman army just got pretty much wiped out. Now, Serenus follows this up with another cavalry charge. This doesn't break the Romans, but it does force them closer together. Remember, Cassius's advice had been to spread out. This makes Crassus's decision to bunch up even more damaging, because as they get closer together, the Romans make better targets. They present a target-rich environment to all those horsemen who are not going to run out of arrows for the time being. So the day goes pretty bad for the Romans. Nighttime comes. The adversity and the death of his son finally catch up with Marcus Licinius Crassus, and he basically collapses and curls up in a ball in his tent. He is out of combat at this point, and basically out of command. Now this devolves the command on Cassius, who calls a council of war, and the Romans try to make a silent retreat by night. But they're not the greatest soldiers that the Republic built. The public could recruit, so the silence is broken by carelessness. This alerts the Parthians. In the morning, Serenus pursues. Cassius escapes to Syria with some cavalry, and he does a whole lot to defend the province from Serenus's pursuit. Most importantly, he manages to hold on to the great city of Antioch. And while the Parthians could beat the Romans, they could not conquer Syria. Remember, it's the most wealthy province in the Republic too. So Cassius saves the day for Rome, and some of his cavalry and some of the infantry manage to escape. And Cassius puts them to work resisting the pursuit. Now Crassus and much of the rest of the army, they're gone, they're wiped out. and the Parthians call to surrender. This just brings disorder, and everything falls apart. Cohesion's gone. Roman losses. There were about 30,000 men in Crassus's army, and maybe 5,000 infantry and 500 cavalry escaped to Syria. So this is a massive, massive loss. More to Crassus than to the Republic, because remember, these are troops that this is his private army. But still, we're seeing about 25,000 Romans get killed or captured. Crassus and his son Publius are both killed. So they're not coming back. And there are all the stories too about how the Parthians rubbed it in. They had a Greek dramatic reading in their capital, and they brought Crassus's head in as part of the audience so he could watch himself being humiliated. I don't know how many of these stories are true. There's another one where they reward his greed by pouring molten gold down his throat. I'm not so sure about that. If it happened, he was dead by then. But Crassus is dead. Publius is dead. 25,000 men from the legions are dead or captured. Armenia is lost as an ally. Remember, Orodes had the bulk of the Parthian forces facing Armenia. Armenia realigns with Parthia as a result of the Battle of Carrhae. Now, Syria, that's held. This is mainly due to Cassius and the survivors of the battle. Give Cassius some credit here. He's not really well liked by history because of the assassination of Caesar. But I think if you believe the Greek and Roman sources, especially Plutarch, that Cassius was a far better leader, a far better general. And maybe he doesn't get the credit he deserves for pulling Roman fat out of the Parthian fire after his boss screwed up so massively. Rome's humiliated. Even though this is a private army, it's still seven legions of Romans that are destroyed. So this is a very bad day for the Republic. And I'll say this too, that this ended the triumvirate because the balance was gone. Now you have two guys. Crassus is gone, but you have Pompey and you have Caesar. And it's really only a matter of time before things fall apart. And it really does after Julia dies. And the marriage that bound Pompey and Caesar together, that collapses, and Pompey sides with the Senate and the more conservative elements in Rome, including Cicero. And it starts a whole new round of war between Pompey and Caesar, with Roman fighting Roman. So let's look at some of the references here. The last one, of course, is mine. Eagles in the Sand, the Battle of Carrhae, 53 BC. This is in Command Magazine, issue 12 from 1992. So I wrote this 35 years ago. Most of the other sources were ones that I used. Now, one of these, the one above my article by William Finnegan and Arthur Boak, this was the textbook that Dr. Clack assigned in Hellenistic history. And we used the first half up to the founding of the Principate, all through the Roman Republic. So yeah, I've kept most of my college, even undergraduate textbooks. Plutarch was my main source from the ancient world, the lives of the noble Grecians and Romans. Plutarch doesn't really care a whole lot about tactics and things like that. He looks at character, and he really emphasizes Crassus's greed and his inability to listen. Josephus contribute some of my understanding from his book, The Jewish War. Do not make a suicide pact with Flavius Josephus. I think he's one of the great traitors of all time, but someone whom we rely on for what we know of the Jewish revolt in 67 CE and the fall of Jerusalem. Now, there is a growing body of more current scholarship on the late Roman Republic and also on Rome's relationships with Persia and Parthia, and then Persia again after they overthrow the Parthians. And a very good book on this is Rome and Persia, the 700-Year Rivalry, published in 2023. This is written by Adrian Goldsworthy. If there's a book by Goldsworthy and it's on Rome, it's worth reading. This is an excellent book, one I can highly, highly recommend to anybody. In fact, I hold Goldsworthy in such respect that when I taught an online course on Roman history, and I was asked to please make it centered on Roman military history, I used one of Goldsworthy's books on the Roman army. So read Goldsworthy, he's good. There are others too, but this is a partial bibliography. You can find others that are good, but I think of the ancient sources, the ones that cover the personalities the best are the lives written by Plutarch. And of course, read whatever I wrote. But anyway, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for your attention to this matter, and I appreciate your time. And as always, please feel to like and subscribe, share with your friends. If you're a student, feel free to use my presentation as a source. If you're writing a paper or something, if any of your teachers or professors say that's not good enough, send them my direction. I'll get their minds right. Subscribe to my channel and share with your friends too. Share with people you don't like, but share away. It's not meant to be held under a bushel basket. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. And I will see you down the road with more videos. Until then, goodbye.